Hey everyone, this is Eric Keller for ZBrush Jewelry Workshop. I want to do a short video that kind of is an overview of this project I started a few weeks ago. This is my jumping spider ring. This is kind of an interesting experiment. Jumping spiders are one of my favorite animals, so I've been trying to figure out a way to feature them in a piece of jewelry for a while. And after a few experiments, I kind of landed on this design, which I'm still working on, but I kind of like it. And I think it's at a state right now where it might be kind of fun to talk about it and just show some of the techniques and some of the thinking behind the design. So this ring design has been featured on the latest video from VOG, Veg Oil Guy. Check out his YouTube channel. It's a lot of fun to watch, and he has a lot of great videos and reviews related to 3D printing and other fun projects. So in his latest video, he's reviewing the Frozen Sonic Mini 8K, and he's showing a bunch of different projects, not just mine, but some other stuff that he's printed. Let me see if I can get some good screenshots here. There are some good areas here. So great place to check out some cool reviews and learn a lot about the ins and outs of 3D printing. So jumping spiders are adorable and they're a lot of fun, and you can find them everywhere. There's probably a bunch in your backyard right now. They've become much more popular lately because, in my opinion, because of how digital technology with cameras has made macro photography so much more accessible to the general public. So those are some pictures that I took of various insects, including a jumping spider. My main inspiration comes from the artist Thomas Shahan, who's a photographer, musician, artist, and just all-around great guy. I've had the pleasure of taking several macro photography workshops with him. Here's one of my favorite drawings that he's done, this giant jumping spider. I just love the style. It's fantastic. Need to get a print of that. Here's another one that I really like. He also has a YouTube channel, and he talks a lot about macro photography, jumping spiders, relief printing, all kinds of stuff. He's even worked on some video games, which are really cool. He's just too talented, and also, again, super nice guy. Not too long ago, I authored a video series for the Gnomon Workshop on modeling and rendering a realistic jumping spider. So a little plug here for my series on the Gnomon Workshop. Check it out. And it's also on my website. I have some renders here. So this is created, the model is created in ZBrush, exported to Maya. I textured it in ZBrush and Substance, and I used Yeti for the fur, and rendered it in Redshift, and the whole series goes through the process from ZBrush all the way to final render. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how I used this original model as the starting point for my ring. Whenever you're doing like an animal for a piece of jewelry or whatever, even if it's going to be stylized, I think it's a really good idea to take the time to actually model like a realistic, anatomically correct version of the animal, because that gives you the background in your mind and some experience understanding the shape language of the animal, and also you have a base mesh that you can use then for your stylized version of it. So it's a good practice if you have the time to do it. I highly recommend it, and it's always good to learn. Take the opportunity to learn about animals and nature, especially something as crazy as spiders, because they're very different from us. So there's actually a whole community of people who have jumping spiders as pets. They make great pets because they're completely harmless to us, not so to flies. So if you're not a big fan of flies, then you probably like jumping spiders. So here's a website called Big Fat Fids. They actually create enclosures, and they ship you food for your spiders to eat in case you don't feel like catching flies, and teach you about caring for jumping spiders, and it's all thing jumping spider related. So I highly recommend checking them out if you get the jumping spider bug. Is that a pun? I don't know. That might be a mixed metaphor. In any case, let's get into ZBrush and talk about this ring project. So the goal is to create a ring that reads as a spider from far away, from like this distance, well enough. I also wanted to make sure that it didn't look creepy or scary. So I'm a spider advocate. So I don't want to do like, typical Black Widow death kind of skull and horror and monstrous stuff. That's just not my style for the most part. I wanted something that was had a lot of appeal to it. And jumping spiders are great for that because, look at these guys. They're really adorable. So we have a few big challenges with this. How do we get it to read the spider? We got a bunch of legs to deal with. And then we also have these hairs. These hairs are really important because that's what gives the jumping spider a lot of its personality. This is a different species. The one that I chose for this ring was the same one that I did for the Gnomon Workshop, which is Phidippus mystachus. Although this is a bit stylized, and a lot of how you distinguish one jumping spider from another comes down to their coloration, which I'm not going to get through in the ring. But I had to start with some kind of, a basis for the design. So I had recently done this praying mantis ring, which I thought came out pretty well. A similar kind of goal to make something that was kind of adorable, accessible, appealing, and also read from far away. This one is a bit trickier because it's even more alien than the spider. But some of the things that I liked about how this design came out is that I liked how I ended up doing the legs. It's because the legs are a big part of praying mantises. And so this idea of kind of wrapping them around the side, I was thinking maybe I could do that for the jumping spider. And I only had the forelegs on the praying mantis because that's all you really need for it to read as a praying mantis. So I thought maybe I could do something similar with the jumping spider. So let's take a look at this photo that I took of a jumping spider. Big, adorable eyes. Jumping spiders are one of the few types of spiders that actually have decent vision. Most spiders have teeny tiny eyes, and they're basically little better than light detectors. But jumping spiders are diurnal, meaning they hunt during the day, and they jump around, and they are ambush. They ambush their prey, and they grab them. They don't necessarily make webs. So we got the big eyes, and we have the hairs, but we also have the pedipalps, which pedipalps are their little arms, which they use to grab the prey. The males actually use this to deliver sperm to the ladies. So I guess these should be blurred out technically to make them safe for work. But unless you work with a lot of spiders, people won't get offended. So, but they tend to, when they're in resting position or not grabbing prey, they tend to kind of hide behind them in the front, which is one of the things that makes jumping spiders so adorable, right? And they have the chelicerae, which are its fangs, kind of right behind that. And then, of course, you have the abdomen in the back, and then the other eyes and the other parts of the head. And then the other big challenge is that the legs, they're not coming out of the abdomen, they're coming out of the bottom of the cephalothorax, which is their head/thorax, right? Spiders are different from insects. Insects tend to have head, thorax, and abdomen. Spiders have the cephalothorax and the abdomen, and the legs come out of the bottom of the cephalothorax or the head, whatever you want to call it. Let's just call it head. And so what I decided to do was make the whole of the ring right through the center of the abdomen, and then feature the head with all of its wonderful personality and its 8 eyes and its furry cat-like little hairs and that kind of stuff in the front, and then surround the side with the legs. And then in the back, I had the back of the abdomen, and you can see the spinnerets down here. And then, of course, this covered in fur. And one of the nice things about, incorporating the fur, and I'll talk about how I did this in a little bit, but, I want contrast in terms of texture on the design so that even from far away, right, you can see those eyes. Those eyes are nice and smooth, and since they're smooth, they should be nice and reflective, but they're surrounded by this furry bit, and the little furry texture here creates a contrast between not smooth and smooth, so that it helps you to focus your attention right on those eyes, which is the first thing that I want people to see when they look at the ring. So to start the actual ring, I took my base mesh. So this is what I created for that Gnomon workshop series. This is my Phidippus mystachus female. It's completely bald and has no detail, and everything's been merged into one subtool at the lowest subdivision level, because I know I'm going to be moving this thing around. But you can see all the parts are there, and it's in the correct proportions. So we have the abdomen, spinnerets, we have all the legs coming out of the head. I even have like the mouth parts. This is the chelicerae right here. These are its fangs. These are the pedipalps, and then we have the 8 legs, and so on. So I merged that all into one subtool at the lowest subdivision level, and then I added a ring template. So this is about a size 9 ring, so it's already scaled, so that helps me keep everything in the correct scale. I also brought in that mantis ring just as a reminder of how I did things, and also scale reference. So I had to make some decisions. What's the most important thing about this model that I need to bring into my final ring design? Eyes, number one, most important thing, because that's the thing that you're going to identify with. I wanted to have the chelicerae. They're not quite as important as, say, their eyes. I do like sort of this upper lip structure right here that kind of, it's the top of the mouth, but also creates a sort of a human-like quality to it. I wanted to have the chelicerae, but I don't necessarily need the fangs or the teeth right here, and I definitely don't need these mouth parts. So I can ignore that or push them off to the side. I need the pedipalps. Those are the little things that hang out in front of the chelicerae right here, right? So got to have that. And the pedipalps kind of serve the same function as the forelegs and the mantis, right? The forelegs and the mantis give this organism its personality. You can see kind of what it's doing. It's hanging out, waiting for prey or whatever. So pedipalps have that same kind of quality, but I want to make sure that they're in front of the chelicerae. And then, of course, spiders are known for their 8 legs. So I want to make sure that I have the legs in there, and that is the biggest challenge. So let's talk about how I dealt with the legs. So I started by organizing the model. Merged the head and the eyes and the pedipalps and the chelicerae and the fangs all into one subtool. I kind of posed them a little bit, so you can see I squished it a little bit along this axis, on the z-axis, and tilted it down just a little bit. I made the legs their own subtool, and they're all organized into polygroups. The polygroups are symmetrical across the x-axis. Let's switch over to this white material so it's easier to see. So you can see how they're symmetrical. So easy way to do this is like, each one of these leg segments is its own mesh. So if you use auto groups, it's going to create a different polygroup for each individual mesh, which is cool, except now they're not symmetrical. Each one is its own polygroup. So I haven't posed these, I haven't subdivided them or added any detail. So at this point, I used mirror and weld just as a cheap, quick, easy way to mirror this side over to this side, including all the polygroups. And now I know they're perfectly symmetrical because that's going to make it easier to pose. And then, of course, I have the abdomen as its own subtool. Polygroups are, of course, the key to mastering posing or moving things around in ZBrush because it makes it easier to mask things. I mean, why didn't I just sculpt the legs into the side of the body? That would be the most obvious choice, right? Just start whacking away until I have the legs in here. I thought about that, but I think my experience when I tried doing that with the Mantis ring, it turned into a disaster pretty quickly. I found it was much easier if I had the actual 3D meshes that I could pose them the way that I want, because I think the most important thing is to make sure that it's very obvious what's in front of what. And by having these as 3D meshes and posing the 3D meshes, it's easier in my brain to keep track of where everything is going. Here's a later version of the model where you can see I started to pose the legs using that template as a guide. And I started with the back legs. So I had the back legs all the way wrapping around all the way to the rear here. And then I had made the second to back legs kind of overlapping. And I kind of like this crisscross pattern because that makes kind of a pleasing design, and it is also pretty typical for how these guys, when they're hanging out, they tend to be in this sort of crouched position where their front 2 pairs of legs are kind of moved forward and the back legs are kind of hanging out in the back. So I wanted to convey that. At this point, what I did is I decided to make each pair of legs its own subtool. Actually, let's just turn on transparency. So there's this one, and then there's this one. I'm kind of out of order here, but then there's this one. So then I basically, each pair at a time, I use the gizmo to kind of pose them and wrap them around. Well, this one I want to have kind of in the front here, right? And then by taking advantage of the polygroups, it makes it easier to, I can isolate parts of the model. Let's do this. I can Control-Shift-Click on this to hide everything else. Control-Shift-Click on it again to invert the selection. So now I'm just hiding these pieces, and now I can, Control-A for mask and invert the mask, however technique you like to use to just isolate and mask different parts. Now I can go in here and start to pose it. So this is probably what took the most time in terms of just sorting these things out. And very carefully pose them and kind of squish them as well. So if we look at this later version, I kind of scaled these back so that they're a little bit flatter. But I wanted to make sure that, a couple things, that it was obvious what's in front of what. So this is in front of this. This is in front of both these back legs. This segment right here is behind these segments, which are in front. And then this front leg is in front of that. Same kind of arrangement there. So it just took a lot of moving things around with the gizmo. One of the things I love about the gizmo in this latest version of ZBrush is the fall off. So let me show you what I mean. So normally if I take the gizmo here, and then of course I can rotate and scale and so on as needed. But now they've introduced in ZBrush 2022 the idea of having a fall off for the gizmo. So if I press the O hotkey for the fall off, or focal shift slider rather, I move this almost to, you know, like 89, 90 around there. What I could do now is it makes it easier to use the rotate as a way to twist things. So if I position the gizmo, let's say over here, and start to rotate and then move, let's make that fall off a little bit lower. You can see it makes it a lot easier. It's like a soft select in other 3D programs. So, and then depending on where you position the gizmo, right, with that same fall off, I have different options here for which part of the legs that I'm moving. All right, so that was extremely helpful. And so the next thing I did was take a look at the abdomen. So for the abdomen, I basically positioned the abdomen. I think, again, wanted to make it as clear as I possibly could, given the difficulties of making this a ring, that the legs are not coming out from under the abdomen, or suggesting at the very least that they look like they're coming out from underneath the head, because I have a lot of science nerd friends that would really complain if it looked like I had the legs coming out of the abdomen. That would be a huge no-no in the spider world, right? So what I did with the abdomen is I took the abdomen here, I put it in a folder with a mandrel, which is a cylinder I'm using for the mandrel, and basically booleaned that folder. So I have that going right down the center, and then I choose boolean folder, and it creates the result right here, which is the abdomen with a hole cut in it. So here's everything merged as one subtool. Then this is Dynamesh together, so it's all one surface. Of course, it means that there's going to be some cleanup, because there's going to be little holes and gaps and other bits, and of course I've lost some of the detail. I think that's okay, because it's not going to be a super detailed model anyways, but there's definitely going to be some cleanup involved. And then I used Z-remesher after doing some cleanup to kind of neaten up the topology, because this is what the Dynamesh topology looks like. So it's about 1 million polygons. ZBrush in most recent versions of ZBrush is really good. Does a nice job of creating a decent topology for sculpting. We can see the calycery, these big sort of semi-squarish objects, and the pedipalps are on top of it. So I want to make sure that I had some of the calycery poking out right here. And you can even see the segments of the pedipalps. Again, if I tried to just sculpt this into a single surface, I don't know that I would have been that successful. By posing it as a separate mesh and then fusing it together and all that good stuff, I get something that looks 3D. And it also has a lot of depth to it, which I think is what made it successful in the prints that Vogue did. And so by having that much depth, right, we have these wonderful shadows that really help to highlight what's in front of what and makes the design nice and clear. If this had been too shallow, it would have just looked like a bunch of noise. And okay, so now we see the design is coming there. We have most of the pieces in place. Even the spinnerets in the back came through. But there's something seriously lacking in the design here, and that is our little hairs here. So this is the next big challenge, because I can't do this, right? At that scale, this would be like a hypodermic needle coming out of the ring. So I had to come up with a compromise that suggested that those hairs are there because they're an important part of the design, but not so, not too fragile, not too sharp. So I decided to go with something that's a little bit more pointier that I could then, draw the hairs on top of, like this. And I think that works pretty well. Now in this version of the design, I made the eyes really big. I went huge with the eyes. It was starting to look a little bit too cartoony. So I'm trying to find some kind of middle ground between something that's, stylized and appealing, but not too cartoonish. You guys are probably familiar with the Lucas the Spider animation that came out a few years ago. So it's a brilliantly done animation. And I apologize, I forget the name of the artist who did it. But it's totally not my style because it's very, very cartoony, very, very adorable, kind of too Disney. And I didn't want to go that far. After I worked out this design and made the eyes really big, I decided, let's make them a bit smaller so they don't look too much like Lucas and too cartoony. So here is one of Thomas Shahan's beautiful pieces of art. And this is actually the same species I was going for, Phidippus mystachus. So he's got the eyes big, but they're not super big, not like cartoonishly big. So I decided to dial them back a little bit. So the next big challenge was to do the fur. So here's another later stage of the model where I started to dial in the fur. So to do the fur, it was pretty easy to do and a lot of fun. And I think it came out pretty well. What I did is, for the subtool right here in the tool palette, I went down to thick skin and I activated thick skin. And I set the thickness to around, somewhere between 4 and 6. I just played around with different depths. But what the thick skin does is let's turn it off real quick. And I'm going to take like one of these brushes here. This is the TWSK cloth brush, which is one of my favorites. So what I did, if I draw it normally, this is what it looks like, right? So it's got kind of an angle right here, a bump. But I really wanted to have this flat surface on the top because it would make a surface that was kind of more reflective, but also reminiscent of this kind of style, right? Very graphic is what I wanted. So this is where thick skin came in. So turning on thick skin, setting the distance between 4 and 6 or something like that. Now as I draw out these strokes, you can see it kind of levels off at the top. So I also spent some time playing with the brush settings to get precisely the stroke type that I wanted. This is okay, but you can see is if I press lightly, the Z intensity goes down. If I press harder, it goes up. And so I end up with these things, which I don't want. So to fix that, I went into the brush palette for this brush, and under tablet pressure, turn off use global settings, and I took the Z intensity graph. And this is what it is normally, meaning this side is pressing lightly, this side is pressing hard, and so you have a ramp up from pressing lightly to pressing hard. So I want to get rid of that. So to do that, go into the brush palette, under tablet pressure, Z intensity, I just basically move this marker up in the graph so that this means it's always the same intensity no matter how hard I press, right? So if I press light or hard, it's always the same. The next thing you'll notice is I'm still getting a little bit of that ramping. That is because of the brush size graph. So let's open up the brush size and move this up as well so that there's less of an influence of tablet pressure on the brush size. And now I get a mark that is consistent all the way along. And then it's just a matter of finding the right draw size to get the stroke that I want. And then maybe lowering that thickness to, say, 4. So just balancing that out until I got something kind of like this. Maybe make some draw size higher. Right? And then I was able to go through I turned off symmetry because I didn't want the hair strands to be symmetrical. This is a very symmetrical pose, which is kind of typical of jumping spiders, so I didn't break the symmetry too much. But I do want to have some asymmetry in the model, otherwise it's going to look really boring. So I turned off symmetry, and then for the head, I just went in and drew all these squiggly lines. I wanted the lines in the chelicerae to be a bit longer. A lot of jumping spiders will have that kind of their hair quality on the chelicerae, if you can see past these. And then there's also, you notice that they have little hairs that kind of hug the edges of the eyes here to create almost like an eyelash kind of quality. I definitely wanted to bring that out, so I did that right here. But I made the hairs in the chelicerae a bit longer and these shorter. The hairs in the abdomen are a bit longer. So in an earlier version, I did experiment with putting a little highlight, sculpting a highlight on the eye, because that was really successful on the Mantis. These are what's known as the pseudo pupils on the eyes of the Mantis. From far away, it gave the eyes a lot of personality. So I tried that on this version of the ring, and I even put the highlights in the other smaller eyes. But in the end, I thought this was counterproductive because, first of all, it makes it too cartoony. Second of all, this is already a reflective surface. So drawing a highlight on a reflective surface is kind of counterproductive, right? This is meant to be a specular highlight, which is a reflection of light source. So this is going to be printed in metal. Why would you draw that on there? Didn't make any sense. Made it too cartoony. And I also think that having it perfectly smooth in the final design will bring out the reflectivity of the eyes a bit more. Because from far away, I think that's distracting. So anyways, that was my thinking on that. So that's where I'm at right now with the design. Still have a ways to go, some other issues I need to solve. I want to make sure, first and foremost, that the ring is actually comfortable to wear so that these legs on either side aren't digging into the fingers in some uncomfortable way. But I don't want to lose the detail. So I got to work that out a little bit more. I've added some like noisy texture here underneath the legs to kind of imply empty space. I hope that works. I don't know. Maybe I might do a version where the legs are more asymmetrically posed. See if I can make that a little bit clearer, but so far it's working okay. So I know this has kind of been an overview. I didn't really get into details of working with ZBrush. If you are curious about how to use ZBrush to create jewelry, then I recommend that you check out ZBrush Jewelry Workshop. Check out our website, learn about membership. We have a nice little video where Tomas Wittelsbach explains what the whole deal is with membership and what kind of benefits you get. We have, of course, the courses are a big part of it. So we're teaching everything from ZBrush to, we'll be adding more videos about the actual printing and casting process, and then also rendering and imaging and so on. So check out ZBrush Jewelry Workshop. Also, make sure you like and subscribe this video here on YouTube, because we post a lot of videos that are freely available to everyone. So check those out. Also, we do our monthly challenges and so on. I'll do another video later on once the ring is cast, and check it out and see what it looks like in sterling silver. And eventually I will be selling this ring along with some of the other ones that I've been creating. So thanks again for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this.